Today we're going to talk about how to properly fit your e-collar to your dog so that your training is consistent and you know that your dog is actually feeling the e-collar. So stay tuned and let's get started. For Misty here, we'll be using the short contact points because you can see that she has short hair. For Stanley here, we're going to be using those extra long contact points because between groomings his hair gets really long. It gets about 2 inches, sometimes 3 inches long between groomings, and we want to make sure that those contact points connect with his hair or with his skin whenever he is wearing it. When you receive your e-collar, it will come stock with short contact points, and then there will also be some extra longer contact points in there as well. Depending on the length of your dog's hair, you'll have to decide what works best for your dog. If your dog has allergies to metal, you can also get hypoallergenic contact points like the ones I have here on Misty's collar. Or if your dog has very, very long hair or thick hair, they're like a husky or a golden retriever or a malamute, you can get the extra long, thick-haired contact points like we have here for Stanley. Stanley is a Bernedoodle and his hair gets really long between groomings. These contact points help so that we can get through his hair so he feels that contact point and the e-collar works for him. First, I'm going to demonstrate how to fit the collar to Misty. You'll also see a difference here. These are the collars that come with your e-collar, and this is a bungee collar. I prefer the bungee collar because you can set your dog's tightness on their collar and you can just clip it and you know that it's always on the right tightness. Also, the bungee makes it so that when your dog moves around or then their neck flexes, the collar will change size and shape depending on where it's sitting on their neck. These don't have any flexibility and can make your training a little bit inconsistent when it comes to the contact points connecting with their skin and them being able to feel that stimulus. When putting the collar on your dog, you want to make sure the contact points are connecting with a muscle. People have the same muscles in their necks as dogs do. We have a big muscle here, a big muscle here. There's not any muscle at the front and there isn't any muscle at the spine. So you want to make sure that the collar is resting on either the side or the other side of their neck. If the collar slips and starts to move down as the dog is running around and it ends up at the front on their trachea, then the collar is probably not tight enough. Your collar should be tight enough so that it stays on that muscle. So if you find that by the end of a walk it's down here, then your collar is not tight enough and you need to tighten it. First, we're going to be fitting this e-collar to Misty. When I put it on her, you can see here, you want it to be on either this muscle right here or the muscle on the other side of her neck. You don't want it on top of her spine or down on her trachea. These e-collars work with muscle stimulation, so you want to make sure it's on the muscle. I'm going to put it on her so you can see how tight I do that. So that's the tightness you'd want there. As you can see, it's getting through her hair, it's contacting her skin, and she'll be able to feel that. If she runs around though, it might move a bit, so this might actually be a little bit too loose. I'll put it one more tighter. That way, when she runs around, this now isn't going to move off of that spot. You might feel like it's a bit too tight on your dog. That's when those bungee collars come in handy. Another way to know that the collar fits well is by trying to fit your fingers underneath those contact points. If you can barely fit your fingers under there and it's pretty tight pushing onto your fingers, then you know the collar is tight enough. It's important that the collar is tight enough so that you know your dog is feeling that stimulus. If the collar is too loose, so if I loosened it about 3 holes there, now this collar is way too loose. You can see that amount of space under there. This is not going to contact consistently and will drastically affect her training. Next, I'm going to demonstrate this bungee collar instead. I'll show you how it fits a little bit better and we don't have to put it as tight on her neck because this bungee will tighten up and make it more consistent. So I have this preset to the size that she usually needs. I clip that on. So as you can see here, this is a way better tightness. This bungee will move and tighten as she moves. And when I try to fit my fingers underneath those contact points, it's still tight, but this collar doesn't feel as tight because that bungee helps it be a little bit more comfortable for the dog. Okay. Here we have Stanley. Stanley's collar has those extra long contact points on them to get through his thick curly hair, especially between groomings when his hair gets longer. So I'll show you how to fit this to a dog with longer hair. Okay, so as you can see with Stanley, the collar actually doesn't have to be as tight because the contact points are longer and reach his neck sooner than the shorter contact points would. On him, you can see here, if I try to put my fingers underneath, it's pretty tight, and that's definitely contacting his skin, and it's getting through that hair. His hair does get very long. It gets about this long between groomings. So as you can see, if he had long hair, it'd be sticking out to here, and this e-collar would look like it's almost really squished into his fur. That's why we put the extra long contact points on for him. If you have a dog with long hair or curly hair or really thick hair, then you might want to also use these longer contact points. After you've done a few training sessions and you know that this is the proper tightness for your dog's collar, what you can do is take a Sharpie and put a line on the collar. Okay. So once you put a line there, you can make that line a little bit darker, and then you'll know for sure that's the spot that you need to put the collar every single time that you do training. This will help with consistency as well. Putting that line there will make it so that every single time you practice with your dog, you'll know where to put the collar and how tight to put the collar. It is very important that your dog's collar is fit properly, that it's tight enough that it's actually contacting their skin and they're feeling that stimulus. And it's also important that you're always putting the collar the same tightness every single time that you put it on them. That's why I recommend marking that hole with a Sharpie or even some nail polish or something that's going to stay on there so that you know that's the tightness you put it at every single time. If you are inconsistent with how tight you put the collar, and some days it's loose, sometimes it's tight, your training is also going to be inconsistent. You want to make sure you have that consistency so your dog doesn't get confused or scared of the e-collar. For example, if your dog is feeling the e-collar, it's fitted properly, say they're on a 10 with the e-collar and they're consistently listening to a 10 and it's working for you, but then the next day you don't put the collar on as tight and the 10 doesn't seem to be phasing them, they're not feeling it at all, then you're confusing them for one. And then also, a lot of the times when your dog isn't responding, people will turn it up. They'll maybe turn it up to a 20 or a 30, and your dog won't feel it at first because the collar is actually not contacting their skin, but then all of a sudden they'll turn their neck, which will push the collar into their neck, and all of a sudden they'll feel that 30 and it'll freak them out. So having an inconsistent tightness on your collar will really result in poor results with your e-collar training. So please make sure that you put the collar on the same tightness every single time, that it's tight enough that you know for sure that they're feeling that e-collar, and that you're not changing levels a ton because you shouldn't be changing from a 10 to a 30 back to a 15 if your collar is consistently tight and on the right level or on the right tightness. Another very important rule that I usually tell all my clients is never attach your leash or your long line to your e-collar. If you attach the leash or the long line to your e-collar, then your training will become inconsistent. As you can see, when I pull on the leash, it pushes the e-collar further into my skin, making it so that if that stimulus was on at the same time that leash was being pulled, that's going to feel a lot stronger of a stimulus than if it wasn't attached. So you want to make sure that your leash or your long line is never attached to your e-collar at any time, because it will make your training inconsistent. It will make that feeling of the stimulus stronger or less strong depending on if the leash is pulling the collar closer to the skin or further away from the skin. So make sure your leash or your long line is attached to a separate collar and not the e-collar. My recommendations for contact points depending on your dog's hair length. If your dog has one coat and has short hair, then you can use contact points that are super short, about that size. So these are the contact points here that come with the collar in the box when you receive the box in the mail. If your dog has a little bit longer of hair, maybe it doesn't have a double coat, just has a single coat, then using the longer contact points here that come in the bag will probably be good enough. If you have a dog that gets groomed regularly and between groomings their hair gets really long, then you might want to use either the long contact points, which are the ones that come with the collar. You can see them here on this remote or on this collar. Or you can use extra long contact points like these ones. Or you can also use the thick hair contact points. I'm going to leave it up to you to decide on what contact points you think are going to work the best for your dog's hair. If you do have a husky or a Malamute or even a golden retriever or a dog with really thick hair and a double coat and lots of scruff on their neck, then I would definitely suggest getting these long contact points when you order your collar. If you already have your collar, it's already came in the mail, then you can try those longer contact points that come with it. If those aren't good enough, then put a second order in and get those longer ones. It's better to be set up properly with your e-collar, knowing your dog is feeling the e-collar every single time that you're pressing that button, than having inconsistency because the contact points aren't long enough. If you're having a really hard time with your dog feeling the stimulus on the e-collar, you can also shave a little spot on their neck and put the contact points and the e-collar right there where you've shaved. This might be necessary for dogs like huskies. I have had difficulties with fitting dogs or fitting huskies in the past with e-collars because they have just so much hair and so much scruff on their neck. And there has been clients of mine in the past that have had to shave just a tiny little spot for their e-collar. Another spot you can try as well is right behind their ear. There's less hair right behind the ear. That could be a good spot to try if your dog has long hair or really thick hair. Now that you've watched this video, you can go ahead and take your e-collar and fit it to your dog. The main things to keep in mind is that the collar is touching their skin and it's getting through their hair. 2, that you can barely fit 2 fingers under those contact points. It should be really tight when you try to fit your fingers under those contact points. And 3, consistency is very important. The most important thing about fitting your collar properly to your dog and making sure that it's the same tightness every single time that they're wearing it is because consistency is the #1 thing when it comes to any type of training, especially e-collar training. I hope this video helped you understand how to properly fit the e-collar to your dog. Remember, if you have any questions, please ask in the online classroom. Thanks, we'll see you in the next one. First, we're going to fit the collar here to Misty. When you put the collar on your dog, you want to make sure that the receiver... Sweetie, that's not a toy.